Welcome to Defense Unicorns, a podcast for mission-focused innovators. We educate, inform, and provide mission heroes with DevSecOps, cybersecurity, and organizational transformation stories from the world's leading problem solvers. I'm your host, Rob Slaughter, and we're excited for you to join us on this journey. Welcome to this episode. Today we have Enrique Oti, one of the co-founders of Kessel Run and the current CTO of Second Front, on the show. He's going to talk to us a little bit about the start of the DoD software factories and the vision behind why that was so necessary. Enrique, welcome.
Hey, Rob, thanks for having me on. It's quite an honor to be here. I'm glad you invited me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining us. One of the first questions I had for you is, can you describe for the audience what Kessel Run is?
Sure. Kessel Run is the term being used by the Department of Defense is a software factory. I don't like to think of that as a software factory, but really Kessel Run is an organization. It's a military unit that actually builds, deploys, and runs software on behalf of the Air Force. And in this case, had a very specific, when we stood it up, very specific mission to support air operations centers. So it's the idea that rather than just building software over a period of years, deploying it to somebody in the field, you actually use a modern agile methodologies, modern DevOps principles, where the team that's building the software is continuously iterating it with the users, deploying it to the field and running it along with the users. So that was Kessel Run. And I think right now it's probably about 1,300 people, builds a wide variety of software products, mixture of military, civilian, and contractors.
So most of the time I want to talk to you, I actually want to talk to you about, early days, really pre-Kessel Run, if you will. I know you actually didn't work for the program office when Kessel Run was founded. Where were you working at before Kessel Run started?
Before Kessel Run, when we actually started the program, I was working at the Defense Innovation Unit Experimental, DIUX, out in Silicon Valley. So I'd helped co-found DIUX back in around the 2015 timeframe. I ran the Air Force team out there. And so what eventually became Kessel Run actually was just one of many little products we ran to try to see what could we do differently. Well, like at the time, our innovation in the early days of DIUX wasn't terribly focused. It was trying a lot of different things, a lot of different experiments. What turned into Kessel Run was one of those early experiments that it just happened to be successful.
So what was it called prior to being called Kessel Run?
Prior to being called Kessel Run, the project didn't really have a name. Actually, I guess we did. Internally, we called it MDOC, which stands for Multi-Domain Operations Center. And we chose that term is because we thought it would sell pretty well in the building, because that was the term that was in the Air Force Future Operating Concept that had come out earlier, I think around the 2015 timeframe. And we're like, ooh, there's this whole MDOC concept of a future operating center. Why don't we try to build one of those? And so internally at DIUX, we called it MDOC, but our first product name was called Jigsaw. And so I think a lot of people know us from that Jigsaw first product that we rolled out.
But one of the things that I love about the military software factories is the inclusion of active duty, for the Air Force airmen, but otherwise active duty military members actually writing software. Um, what did it take to get active duty members to kind of stop working on whatever they were supposed to be working on and head out to help and support you?
Yeah, it didn't take a lot of motivation. It just took money to get them out there. I think there's a lot of people that wanted to come work out there. So yeah, let me back it up a bit and tell you why we chose military members. I think that's kind of part of that. The whole origin here is when we first decided at DIUX that we wanted to experiment with building software and trying a different way of like agile software development practices, DevOps principles, this kind of stuff. We really were not thinking that we're going to sit up and stand up a software factory. That was actually not part of the original design. The original design was for us to learn how to do it and demonstrate there's better ways of building software, and that the idea that the Air Force should know those better ways. Again, this is all about innovation and experimentation in the early days. And so when I looked at how software was being built to the DoD, it was really long timelines, and it was being done by defense contractors. And so I said, what's the opposite of defense contractors in traditional defense facilities? Well, let's go airmen only. Nothing gets surveillance or contractor. I'm like, if I want to prove a use case, I got to show the extreme. So I grabbed airmen only, stick them in civilian clothes, and stick them in downtown San Francisco. Like, let's go like the complete opposite of what someone expects the military to look like. And let's try that. And when I was looking for airmen, it was really initially an email from myself to a few other officers I knew around the Air Force. And then I got the Air Force A6 staff to forward it around all the squadron commanders, the cyber squadron commanders. And I had, I think it was 47 names come back at me, officer and enlisted, 47 blue suit, active duty. And I went through with a software developer I knew because just truth in advertising, I am not a software developer. I was a history major in college. So I sat down with a software developer. We dug through all these resumes, probably interviewed about a dozen, and we chose six, three officers, three enlisted.
So the six that started, the name MDoc is obviously totally different than Jigsaw, and even the concept is different. Did they start writing Jigsaw, or was it a different app that they started developing first?
They did not start with Jigsaw. So when we decided on MDoc, we actually did not have the intent that we're going to build operational software for use by the military. Again, I said this was an experiment. This was to prove we could write software. So we started by building like, how would you do planning inside an air operation, in a future air operation? It wasn't even current state. It was the idea of in a future multi-domain operations center, what would planning software look like? So it actually really did start off as a design thinking kind of event. And let's turn this into something real. It was a proof of concept. It was only a few weeks into the project where my boss, Raj Shah, the director of DIUX, he was out in the Middle East with Eric Schmidt, the head of the Defense Innovation Board, and they were touring the Air Operations Center. And I think the Defense Innovation Board was a little disheartened by what they saw, and especially what they saw with the tanker planning and how we do tanker planning on like the 7 foot wide whiteboard. And so my boss called me from the Middle East and said, yeah, Eric thinks that we could build that in software. He's like, do you think your team could do it? I'm like, I know absolutely nothing about tanker planning. Like one of my friends from college is a tanker pilot. And like might be able to tell me something, but like I know nothing about it, but sure, we'll try. And so what happened was literally probably it was like 3 to 4 weeks after we kicked off the entire project is when I got the call saying, forget this experimental stuff, try to build real operational software for a real warfight. And here's what you're going to build. And that really kind of shifted the focus. And actually, I think it really excited the team. It initially disheartened the team because they'd spent like 3 weeks doing designs on these future things. And I said, sorry, you're going to plan tanker missions. I was like, that is nowhere near as exciting. But then once you start getting into it, you're like, it is exciting. It's exciting to actually work with the real warfighters. It's exciting to actually have a real mission impact instead of just building something experimental and a thought piece.
Talk to me about those 6 airmen at the time. What were they like? What was their backgrounds in? Talk to me a little bit more about them.
Sure. And I won't use names. What were they like? They were motivated. Part of it is I didn't pick the right people, but it turned out fine. And the reason I didn't pick the right people is I didn't know what I needed. All I knew was I needed like 6 people. Like that was like, I was told that's about the right size for a team. Like, okay, I'll go with 6 people. And then we worked with a company that did the enabling for us. It was called Pivotal Labs and now part of VMware. And we kind of show up the first day and they're like, hey, who's your designer? And I'm like, first of all, what does a designer do? I don't have a designer. I have a bunch of people who write code. And so I try to force one of my airmen, a master sergeant at the time, I believe. I try to force him to be a designer because his portfolio was like the best looking portfolio. I'm like, ooh, you must be a great designer. Turns out he's not a great designer. He's a great front end developer, actually a great full stack developer. And I try to force him to be a designer. He's like, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm like, well, I don't have options. So we just like look around the room and it was literally, I just like picked a dude. I'm like, I'm sorry. Like I have to have a designer. You're my designer. So one of the software developers came to designer. Same thing happened with the product manager. One of the software developers like, yeah, you seem like a pretty good leader. So I grabbed one of my officers. I'm like, you're gonna be our product manager. Cause I didn't pick a product man. I didn't know I needed a product manager. So again, we talk about like experimentation and just going with what you got. I just went with what I got. I had 6 people. I'm like, we're going to use you for the best you can, even though that's not what you signed up for. And they had a great attitude about it. They are militaristic, not in a bad way, but when you grab a bunch of military people, and either you're hanging out together, you act military life, which was kind of awkward sitting in a downtown San Francisco office with a bunch of less than militarist companies working right next door, next to us, like chairs over. So it was a fun dynamic, but I think actually, I think everybody kind of loved it. Like they thought we were weird that we're the military guys in the back corner, and we thought all of them were kind of weird because they have like purple hair and everything. We're like, that's like, we're all like shaved heads, it's like, it's such a different mentality and cultural mix. But I think that's what made it work is like forcing us out of our comfort zones into this environment actually, I think made the process and the product much better.
You pivoted to the new tanker planner
Sure.
concept. How long after that till that first initial deployment?
It was about 4 months. It was incredibly fast. Now, I'll be very honest. We did not do that all on our own. There were probably two big enablers to this. So, and this is kind of this is a trend in the DoD, by the way, and we'll kind of probably get to that later. Maybe is that writing software is not hard. I know people listening, people might say, "Oh no, it is hard." Well, not really. In the big scheme of things, of everything you have to do to get software to run in the military, the writing of the code is not the hard part. The hard part is getting through the policies, and the hard part is running it in production. Day two ops in the government is hard. Day two ops in the government on a classified network is even harder. And so really the code production started out a little slow, trying to figure out what it is tank with planning. We actually went out to the Middle East. So this was like end of October, beginning of November is when we started working on it. By the beginning of December, we're out in Al Udeid at the airspace for about 2 weeks. And we sat there, we worked 12 hours a day, right there in the Air Operations Center, talking to users, watching what they're doing, writing up designs on sheets of paper, on whiteboards, getting their feedback. And we were able to get a pretty good product, like an initial kind of thing by January, February, that we were able to get in front of you to say, does this work? But again, not running in production, not connect to anything. What really helped us through is actually two things. One is the A6, so the head of cyber, head of the basically the CIO out there in the Middle East. He was told by the general to take risk, and he was willing to do it. And it is hard to find. It is really hard to find a colonel who's actually says that not only says they're going to take risks, but actually does it. And he and his team work with us day in, day out to make sure that we understood the risks and mitigated the risk, but that we were able to take those risks to deploy software quickly through that accreditation process. But second thing was NGA. And it's actually Paul Puckett back in the day was still at NGA. NGA had actually built out, Ben Tuttle's out there. So like quite a few great innovators at NGA had already been playing around with the software development stuff, and they had built out the platform. They actually had that platform to do the continuous delivery into ops. And so our initial software releases were not on an Air Force platform. We did it through NGA. And so side note to people out there, you don't have to build it all yourself. If someone else has already done it, just use it. It's so much faster. If you need to build it yourself, go ahead. But generally, especially when you're first starting off, if it exists, go ahead and use what's out there. And so we did. We used NGA's platform. The accrediting team up forward was incredibly helpful to us. And we got the product out live in operations by, I think, the beginning of March. First time used in actual ops, which was great. So,
Do you believe that the active duty and civilian workforce in the federal government and in the DoD lacks the talent to write good software?
no, not at all. I think we have the talent. And even if we don't have the talent, we have people who have the mindset and the capacity to learn to develop the talent. The problem is not talent. The problem is structure and policy and guidance as to how to build software and why we build software. So we have the talent. I never believed it's a talent issue, and we proved that. When I actually took over Kessel Run program office, we took people in the program office and we made them designers, we made them PMs, we actually made some software developers, sent in the boot camps. We have the talent. What we don't have is an understanding that allows us to make good decisions to use that talent.
Okay. Then talk to me a little bit about that talent aspect of things. Of course, in the military, federal government and civilian, everything's about, your job code. Are there enough software engineers working across the federal government and the
I guess I'll stick with the Air Force first. I don't want to speak for the federal government and the DoD. The big answer is no, there's not enough. So that's first of all, there's not enough. And I know that. But let's parse that a bit because nuance actually really matters. Let's look at the Air Force. We actually have hundreds of software development. We used to have thousands. It used to be an officer career field. It used to be a very large enlisted career field. Now it's a small enlisted career field, and there's no officer equivalent. But after duty, we have probably 500 or some, maybe a little more coded software developers. The real question is how many of them are actually doing software development? The answer is actually a very small number, like real software. A lot are being used for other things that are not slinging code. They're doing quality control. They're doing management functions. They're working people's websites, which websites, and it's a different skill set between just building a PA website versus, writing a full scope application. So I think the issue is we have a lot of people who can code. It is their career field that aren't being used appropriately. But in addition, there's a lot of people all over the DoD in a bunch of different career fields that also know how to code. That because of the way we set up the personnel system and the way we set up primary duty assignments and secondary duty assignments, we don't give them the opportunity to use that skill set to be software developers within their own organizations. And I think that's something that we really should address. I know a lot of people are trying to address that. I know Spark programs, Tron programs, others are trying to address that, but I don't think we're quite there yet as an organization on how to properly use people that can code and put them into an environment that enables them to actually deliver code. Because again, until you deliver it, until it's in prod, it doesn't matter. It's at that point, it's just playing around. Until it's in prod, it doesn't matter. So we have to find ways to help them get their software into prod.
You had your initial deployment, it was massively successful, and then everybody supported you 100%. There were no doubters, and you guys were allowed to scale, or what happened?
Exactly right. So I guess we're done, right? That's it. We won. Podcast is over. Yeah. No, we all know that is not how it worked. That is not how it works going forward. The wild success we had in the first application led to a couple of things. The two of them. So let's talk about the advocacy. We had great advocacy on that first application from John Horigian, currently the USAFE commander. Back then, he was the AOC, or was the AFSAN commander, the AOC commander. He gave us support. And even before we'd finished up that first app, he was already thinking what he wanted us to do next. And he was telling us what other apps to work on. So that was one level of advocacy. That was at the highest level, at that 3-star level. We had a second layer of advocacy coming out of the program office. And when I say coming out of the program office, I'm talking about the junior officer level. So people like Brian Kroger, Matt Nelson, who else? Anna Furtado, who'd been tasked over to my team. And so you have is at the lower levels, you have a team in the program office saying, they're like with their head on, they're like saying, I'm responsible for delivering new capabilities. I want to do it this way. I don't want to do it the old way. And so we started getting support from kind of an advocacy support inside the program office and also personnel. Again, I had Adam Furtado from the program office for my second application. And so we had support at the very top and we had support at the grassroots. But as everybody says, it's always that middle because the bureaucracy exists to maintain the status quo. That is why bureaucracy exists. And there's nothing wrong with that. You actually need bureaucracies to keep things running properly in large enterprise organizations. But when it comes to innovation, innovation is about convincing that bureaucracy that there's a better way for them to still complete their mission, but to do it in a different manner, and which is a huge focus of true innovation. It's not about rebellion against the system. It's about revolution inside the system where you still get that same desired outcomes, but through a different method. And so the way we did this is we actually brought the program office out to San Francisco. We had that for 3 days. We had, I think, 19 people, the program office, all the way up to Ms. Costello, the deputy SAE. She came out and we sat them down. And, after you show them a few software companies, after you take them up to actually sit there and watch airmen code, after you let them sit down and code with the airmen, you start to see the lights come on that this is different. Not just a little different. This is radically different. But the end states that they desire, which is warfighter support, good weapon systems, cost effectiveness, whatever their end states are, what they start realizing by seeing it in person is they can get there through this methodology. So that's where we started getting the corporate organizational support. So this is end of April time frame, going through that summer there of like 2017, is we start getting corporate support. Now, it was never clean. It was still a fight. It's still a fight now. It's going to be a fight forever. There's always a healthy tension in innovation. But that's when we kind of knew that we had something and that we might have a path to sustainability inside the bureaucracy.
So pre-Kessel Run, or even during Kessel Run, or possibly even during the MDoc days, was it ever at risk of just getting closed down or shut down?
There was not a lot of risk in the early days. And when I mean the first few months, because we did it out in California. We did it under the authority of DIUX, which we work directly for SecDef. And we didn't actually interface with the program. And we deployed the stuff out to the Middle East. And the initial iteration did not actually require technical integrations with the weapon system. And so when we first did it, it was actually not bad. No real pushback. It's when we started building the second application, because now we got some publicity on the first app. So we started building a second application, and that one's a little more closely tied to the weapon system. We now have at least one member of the program office working with us. We have parts of the program office advocating for this methodology. And the rest of the program office going, who are you? Who said you're allowed to do this? And so there was definite tension. So it is in that transition right at the end of where Jigsaw gets deployed, again, March timeframe, before we actually officially stand up Kessel Run, Eat by Name, end of April. There's that tension of like, oh my gosh, they're just going to shut us down. We actually were very worried about that. Is like we got a product live, and now we're going to be shut down because now it has attention. Now people have seen it. Now people are talking about it. So suddenly the antibodies come up. So it was part of that 4 to 6 weeks in there where we were really concerned what that feature is going to hold. But again, by bringing everybody out to the valley, taking it in a collaborative, cooperative manner versus saying, this is the right way to do, you guys are wrong, and doing it more of an education methodology, we actually were able to gain supporters and kind of keep ourselves. But yeah, there was a definite some worry in there for a little while.
And just to reiterate here, because I think it's important to draw up, to get the support you needed, you had the support of a 3-star general to
Correct.
deploy what effectively is a simple web app.
Correct.
To keep everything alive in that transition period, just how high did you have to go to sort of work through those steps within the program office? Was it just at that 3-star level, or did it require steps above that?
No, we had to go above that. So we had to get from the operational side of the house, we actually got advocacy at the 4-star level from Air Combat Command, with a lot of very active involvement from the 3-star level at Air Combat Command to advocate for us. On the acquisition side, it ended up going up to, again, the deputy ATNL, so the number 2 in acquisitions, Ms. Costello. It went as high as her. It obviously went higher than that later, but at that point in time, that initial survival was there. Now, where it went even higher is once the Air Force agreed that we could do this, there's a whole question about, well, can you legally do this because of the money and how it was appropriated? So that even after Kessel Run stood up, we thought we might be killed just because we might not have any money and we might not be allowed. And so it ended up going to the congressional level. So the program office had to go to Congress to ask for reprogramming, and that took months. But now we're talking, we had to decide that we're going to go from building a weapon system in a traditional requirements waterfall fashion to saying we're going to build a weapon system by writing our own code internally was up at the congressional level, all the way to the point that Senator John McCain ended up getting personally involved in this process. And so, yes, when you talk about this going up, it had to go really high up because what I realized over time is lots of people are willing to say no. Very few people have the authority to say yes, but more importantly, very few people think they have the authority to say yes. And so everybody kind of moves it around. So at the end of the day, yeah, it went as far as a couple articles on that, but it went as far as like John McCain really to kind of say, yes, this is okay.
I mean, to me, that's a very, very important point because most innovators want to just keep their heads low because you want to move fast and you know that intention, getting attention from the wrong people, they're going to make you stop. But in order to make the change, what you're saying here, Enrique, is that you had to actually do the opposite. It wasn't okay to keep your head down. You had to actually bring it to the top. And in which case, what was Senator John McCain at the time was head of the Armed Service Committee?
The Center
Yep.
of Services Committee,
Yeah.
correct?
So,
Yeah,
all
yeah,
the way to the top.
that's actually a great point. And that's something we talked about very early on. It's like we were not the first people to do organic government software development, nor were we the first person to do continuous ATOs. US Digital Service had done this. NGA had done this. 18F had done it. Leo Garcigo, Jido had done it. Actually, I called him multiple times for advice on how to set up the software team. The difference we had is when we decided to do it, we decided early on, once we kind of started seeing we're going to have that first win, we decided early on that we're going to do this very loud, very open, very public, and we're going to force a change in the system because we're not going to get real innovation. We're not going to get the real outcomes of innovation in the DoD if it's 35 distinct organizations all doing it silently in their little corners because they don't want anybody to know that they're doing it. The way we get true change is we have to make this the new norm. And so we decided early on, we're going to be loud, we're going to be open, we're going to force the conversation, and we're going to force the fights. And it was a lot of fights. My entire time commanding Kessel Run, was bureaucratic fights to try to keep the organization alive. And actually, the current organization is still fighting to stay alive. There's still antibodies against the idea of government software development. But I think it's necessary. I think you have to be, if you want to be a real innovator, and again, let's talk about a couple of terms here. There's creativity and there's innovation and there's entrepreneurship. They're not all the same thing. They're interrelated though. There's a lot of really creative people doing really creative things, but it's not true innovation unless it has an impact on how the organization executes. That's what like really like real definitional academic description of innovation. It is a change that materially changes how an organization fights its war, does its processes. And so you can be really creative, but not actually drive innovation. But then for the people who actually drive innovation, it requires entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is this mentality that you could do more with less. And it's the idea of that you are going to change a system, you're going to lead, you have to do the work of writing the policies, you have to do the personnel actions, you have to do the technical stuff, you have to do the financial stuff. You imagine like a CEO at a startup. That is entrepreneurship. So you can be innovative all you want. You can think you're innovative. But unless you have that entrepreneurial aspect of changing the full aspects of the system, you don't actually achieve innovation, which is changing the outcome of the operations. And so this is where I think we have a lot of terminology discussions. Well, that's why I'm not such a fan of the innovation word.
So in my view, which I've been actually following your career prior to Kessel Run, when you're at DIUX at the time, just releasing cloud articles and stuff, over at Stanford. But would you say that innovation has helped your career advance from a military standpoint?
What do you mean by that?
I mean, of course, people join the military for different reasons, but of course, the promotion system sort of encourages people, especially at the officer ranks, to achieve great things, which is many times associated with rank. In your opinion, does just fighting the bureaucratic system, did it help or hurt your career?
Um, I think it was probably a bit of a net neutral. And here's why, but I was a little bit of a unique case. I've always kind of fought the system for most of my career, but at much lower levels. And it's like, I think generally being someone who has good idea, not just good ideas, someone who has good ideas and can implement those good ideas, that always helps your career. And whether you call that innovation or not, that's just being a good leader. That's just being a good military member. Have a good idea, take ownership of that idea and implement it. And I did that throughout my entire career. I've done little things you can call innovation before anybody used that word my entire career. I had a little bit of an advantage though. When I finally decided to take on this, I'll call it a quest or a calling to fix DoD software. Again, I'm a history major with a master's in international relations. When I decided to take on the quest for software development, I had already kind of made my career. At that point, I'd been a squadron commander. That's when and by the way, my squadron command time is what made me realize software was so bad, is because of my squadron command time. But I'd already been a squadron commander. I'd already been selected for a fellowship to Stanford. I'd already been picked up below the zone lieutenant colonel. Like I'd done everything possible I needed to do to keep moving up in the Air Force. Like for me, unless I did something illegal or immoral, there's really the risk of not making O6 wasn't really there. So at the end of the day, I really had nothing to lose. So this is the thing that I would like to put out there. Some of the best changes do not come from people at the bottom. And not that the best ideas don't come from people at the bottom, but sometimes the best changes don't. And the reason is oftentimes to change a system, you have to have proven that you can operate in that system. It's a credibility thing. It's a whole expression like only Nixon could go to China. Well, Nixon was he'd proven his anti-China credentials that only he could go to China and negotiate with the Chinese leadership. It's the same thing in the military. Like if you would have proved that you want to change your career field, you want to change a technology, you want to change your weapon system, the people who often do that best are the people who've proven that they're experts in it first. Now they have the credibility to change it. So I'd already proven myself in my career. So I was able to make a change knowing that I'm not actually putting my career at risk. But something else I'd like to throw in there is read an article from somebody who said, Colonel is the greatest rank in the military. It's because you're not going to lose that rank. You're actually allowed to make decisions, but you also know you're never going to go up in rank. So if you're a colonel and you accept the fact that you're never going to be a general, because let's be honest, I'll speak to my peers here. You're not going to be a general. Accept it. You're a colonel. You're done. If you win the lottery and you're like that 2% that make general, awesome, you won the lottery. But at the end of the day, if you're a colonel, you're done. The earlier you accept that, then the earlier you can take real risks to try real change inside those organizations and commands that the government has given you authority over. It is by far, I think, the greatest rank for innovation, yet has the reputation of being part of the frozen middle. So really, this is a culture problem among our GS-15s and kernels. Like, it is the ideal innovation level of it, but it's not used that way.
That's
So
awesome. Describe for me along your journey as Kessel Run went from, DIUX and a good idea into a large org. What was, in your opinion, sort of the lowest point for you?
the lowest point, I'll tell you right now, is actually a pretty low point. And that's kind of strange to say because I've been out for 2 years. But seeing where the community is going right now in terms of Kessel Run explicitly, not talking software development writ large, the DoD. Software development writ large, I think, is on a good path. I have my personal view is that Kessel Run is meandering a bit and is not being quite, how's this? We're not going in the direction we need to go. I think we're going back more towards stovepiping among ops, stovepiping among development, stovepiping among acquisitions. We built the organization to get all that stuff together in one area where we have a single authority to execute all aspects of it, of what it takes to build a weapon system. I think what you're seeing now is kind of that tension to rip it back apart into traditional models to fit into traditional structures. So it's actually kind of a low point right now to see what's happening. During my time at Kessel Run, I'll be honest, like every day was a high point and a low point. Like at any moment, I think we're doing amazing work. And I've said probably the best airmen, like writ large airmen, military, contract, civilian. I'm the best airman in the Air Force. I fully believe that. The most motivated, creative people you can imagine. But at the same time, I'm constantly fighting for budget. I'm fighting for authority. I'm fighting to explain to people why those airmen should even be there as organizations trying to pull them back to their core career fields. And so I don't think there's a single explicit low point, but there's a lot of low points throughout the day. There's a lot of frustration throughout the day on a lot of different topics.
Talk
I
to
don't,
us a
Rob,
little bit.
what do you think my low point was? You watch my career.
No comment.
Oh, come on.
So, talk to us a little bit about how you bounce from those low points, especially in terms of giving folks recommendations. Because I'm sure, you probably had, if you're going to bounce in between them multiple times in a day, you probably had a pretty good strategy. And so just listening in terms of any advice you might have to folks about how do they push through when the bureaucracy is overbearing, when they should have authority yet don't have authority, when they know what's right but aren't allowed to do what's right.
Yeah. So the greatest way to overcome those negative low points is success. Like success trumps everything. Like even like let's say you build an organization with the ultimate culture you can imagine. If you don't actually succeed, that culture starts to fray over time. People live like it's human nature. You thrive on accomplishment. So success actually matters. And so one of the things you can do is look back. Like at any moment in time when I was at Kessel Run, I could look back on where we were a month ago, 6 months ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. You mentioned that cloud article I wrote in 2015. I look back on that article, which by the way, I'm in the process of writing an update on where I think we've gone since then. I look back on there's some things that have not changed since 2015. There's some stuff you look at going, oh my gosh, like the world is different. Like what I wrote doesn't even make sense anymore because you can't imagine that old world. So I think part of bouncing back is looking back and seeing where you've actually been had made accomplishments and be proud of those. Be proud of what you've done. So I think that that's a huge aspect of it. The other part of it is don't take it personal. Like people will make it personal. There are people in the Pentagon that I think made it very personal. And I know that because either they said it to my face or I've heard from others about it. They made it personal. It shouldn't be personal. At the end of the day, all of us have the intent of enhancing national security. All of us have the intent of enabling the warfighter, but we may have different opinions on how to do that. So different opinions is not about making it personal. It's not about making it emotional. The difference of opinion means if someone's not agreeing with you, it doesn't mean you yell at them. It doesn't mean you go stab them in the back. It doesn't mean you get angry at it. What it means is you need to think about what your underlying positions are. You need to think about how you're enumerating those and figure out how to sell it better or how to convince someone or how to educate somebody. So part of it, one of the reasons I think people hit those low points in innovation, and I have it multiple times, is you're taking it personally instead of buckling down and actually figuring out how you can do things better, which kind of leads to kind of a third area of what you can do. Find someone you can talk to. Now, there's a difference, and you need to understand the person you're talking to. If it's just a person you're going to talk to and the two of you are just going to bitch and complain and you bring each other down and become more and more negative, that's not helpful. And I see that. You see this continuous downward spiral of negativity where people now become an echo chamber among themselves of like, we're the best, we're doing it right, everyone else is wrong. That's the wrong kind of person to talk to. You need to find a person you can talk to that you can speak openly to, but then the next sentence they're going to have is, well, why don't we try this? Or maybe this is the approach we should take. And they're looking at solutions. So you need a sounding board for your negativity, get off your chest, but that has to end with solutioneering, not with more negativity. And it is hard to find those people. And there were times in my career where I got trapped mentally sitting around calling people up on the phone, just basically just complaining. That has never helped anybody. And I see it a lot in our innovation ecosystem. I see it a lot. People who just like to complain about everything, but they're not doing the hard work of solutioneering and solving the problems. Like everything's solvable. Everything is solvable. We got to be willing to do the work and find and have a positive attitude that you can solve it. So,
Okay. Well, since you've transitioned from the service,
yeah.
you're now working at a small startup called Second Front as the CTO. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about what you're doing with Second Front?
Sure. So Second Front is like something I've been thinking about for quite a while, which is we have done a great job with software innovation in the DoD of how does the government build better software? How does it build it fast? What we have not quite done is figure out how does the government adopt commercial software faster. There's a few efforts out there. Honestly, where I've come from P1, I think P1 has laid an incredible foundation for kind of thinking through how do you rapidly accredit and onboard software. But at the end of the day, there's still a lot of issues in terms of scalability. There's process issues and there's policy issues. And so a lot of what I've been thinking about for a while here is how do we make it easy? How do we reduce friction? It should not be friction for a commercial company to get into the DoD. At the same time, it should not be friction for a government program officer, accrediting official, evaluator, secure that software. And so what we have done is we build a platform that's really, we'll call it a DevSecOps platform, but really the focus is on the security and operations. How do we run high quality and secure day two operations on behalf of commercial entities to allow them to be accredited and operating inside the DoD's environment? And so that's what we built. We built a product called Game Warden, and that's really kind of the focus of it.
Yeah. So talk to us a little bit. If Game Warden is successful, what does that mean to folks across, the DoD or, federal government or, what is success?
I think what success looks like initially is competition. That's how I'm going to know we're successful. As soon as you have someone trying to compete with it, then it's right. And so I think that's going to be the first thing. Actually, and that's not a bad thing. I'm a massive believer in competition in free markets. I think competition is great because at the end of the day, what are we trying to do? We're trying to make sure that our government users have the best quality technology available to them. There is no one person or organization or company that can scale to do that. It just cannot be done. It's going to take an ecosystem because there's a lot of nuances on how to do it. Some are going to go through something like a platform one. Some will go through something like a cloud one. I think some will continue to use FedRAMP. Some will come through someone like us who can actually operate it on their behalf in a commercial manner. But what success looks like at the end of the day is when an airman wants a piece of technology, from the time that it gets under contract, that should be in their hands within days to weeks, not years, because that software is already built. But we put it under contract and then we spend 18 months trying to accredit it. So success from a user standpoint is when somebody puts a piece of software in a contract, they are able to use it live in their operational environment within days because we've solved the accreditation challenge. So that's what I think success looks like. From a commercial side, it's different. So it's kind of like a multi-party market system here. What does it look like when we talk about the DoD in competition with China and how do we establish a new defense innovation base to enable the warfighter? Well, then what success looks like there is a small startup that's venture backed can get their products in the hands of a warfighter and can make revenue so they can continue to improve that product rather than having their company basically die during that multi-year valley of death. And then either the company collapses or the company leaves the government marketing and says, forget it. We'll leave that to defense contractors. We'll do commercial only. So there is the entire other avenue of success, which is we as a nation have built a defense innovation base that's competitive with China because we no longer have software security and accreditation as a barrier to get access to the best quality tech. So that's kind of what I'm seeing. So I do believe what we're building. I realize every startup says this. Okay, I got it. But I really believe what we're building is game changing. Like it will change the dynamic for both the commercial markets and for DoD users.
What advice do you have for the listeners right now who are going through their own innovation struggle and trying to accomplish their own mission and objectives, probably potentially on a smaller scale or, possibly growing? But what advice and recommendations do you have for them?
Yeah, a couple things. First of all, you're gonna have to put in the hard work of getting top cover. You can't avoid that. The greatest idea will lose out to a mediocre idea if that mediocre idea is being backed by a program office. This is the reality of it. So if you are an innovator, you are going to have to do the hard work of getting leadership cover. And if it's at the unit level, maybe you got the wing commander's top cover. If you're in a program office, it's going to be like your senior material leader or PEO, but you have to get top cover. And I know nobody likes to hear that. Everybody complains, well, that the system's wrong. I got it. Look, there's so many things we can do to change the system. Let's accept the fact that this is the system you have. So this is where entrepreneurship comes in. How do you excel? How do you exceed inside that system? Because your success is what allows you to change the system. So stop complaining about the system, execute inside of it, and use those wins on every step of the way to change that system. So that's kind of like the first level of advice for the innovators. The second one is don't stop innovating. Like there's going to be setbacks. You're going to have products that are good for like our company. Second, we had a product that we pivoted. I thought it was a good product. Thought it had a utility. Didn't have product market fit. So we pivoted. There's nothing wrong with that. I've had some other ideas inside the DoD that, aren't as great. That's fine. It's okay to not have successes. But when you don't have the success, you need to understand why you failed. And so that you understand how to do better the next time. And sometimes it's out of your control. Sometimes it's in your control. But either way, don't stop innovating. Keep trying. And at the end of the day is if you know who your user is and you know what they need and you can find and you can fix that pain point, then you're probably on the right track. Don't just innovate to solve your own problem. That's the other thing. Everybody thinks that they're the smartest person in the world. Like, I got this great idea. Well, if you haven't validated that with people that are going to use whatever you're doing, process, product, application, whatever it is, then it's self-serving. And that's not really innovation. Innovation has to be humble. So if everything you're doing is when it's self-serving, then you're wrong. You have to do something that helps your users.
Should people keep listening to this podcast? You're one of our first guests on the show, which I was honored by, and I want to provide some motivation to folks to why they should keep listening.
Why they should keep listening. Okay. Number one, Rob is, so speaking to listeners out there, Rob is one of the smartest people that has come out of the Air Force. So with that as a base understanding, I'm going to assume that Rob is not going to screw this up and he'll actually keep on bringing on really interesting people and asking really good questions. So in that regard, I think that's good. Why else should they listen? I don't know. What else do you do on your walks? Walk around, drive your car, kind of listen to something. This is way more interesting than a lot of other stuff that's out there. And it might actually help. You might learn something. All right.
Awesome.
How's that, Rob?
Well, that is perfect. Thank you, Enrique. I appreciate having you with us, and thanks again for your time.
Thanks, Rob. It's an honor to be here.